We're breaking down the tea that Adam Ottavino spilled on Carlos Mendoza, the Mets bullpen, and of course Brandon Nimmo. We're also going to talk about if Kodai Senga should be dealt out of Flushing. Let's talk with Tyler Ward, your favorite Mets content creator. Wardy, haven't seen you for a long time, my man. Let's get straight into all this news that's been breaking about the Mets. It was reported Tuesday that Kodai Senga is extremely available for trade as the Mets look to revamp the starting rotation. Are you in or are you out with dealing Senga?
Oh, absolutely in. It's not a question as to if the Mets should trade him, but when they're going to trade him. Okay. There are currently at least 8+ teams in his trade market right now. And that is thanks to people that have relayed information my way over the past 48 hours that certainly are in on the know. And it's telling that Senga is going to be traded because the Mets, as we all know, had everything imaginable go wrong for the rotation in 2025. So much so that even Kodai Senga, who was once this coveted ace in this Mets rotation, going back to his breakout first year in Queens back in 2023, has really been a shell of himself, not so much because of performance, but more so because of the lack of health and availability. Senga looked fantastic to begin the 2025 season for the Mets, but as soon as he went down with yet another ailment there in June, he was a shell of himself once he returned from injury, and he was so bad that the Mets decided to send him down in the minor leagues, where he finished the year in the minor leagues. I was even in attendance for potentially the last ever game he pitched in the Mets organization there against the Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs. And Senga, the biggest problem with him is not only how meticulous of a pitcher he is, but this is the type of guy that needs things his way, not so much how everyone else goes about their operation when getting the best out of a pitcher and their health. And because of that, David Stearns looks like he's pretty much had enough of one Kodai Senga, who needs a six-man rotation, needs this kind of special treatment. And in order for the Mets to upgrade a rotation that heading into next season right now has 8 pitchers under contract that are expected to impact the club, they have to make roster room. And out of their current veteran options, Senga is far and away the most appealing via trade. His ceiling is as good as an ace caliber pitcher, but his floor is as good as someone who couldn't even be in the Mets rotation. So not only does he have plenty suitors, but again, the likelihood of Senga being traded is almost a near certainty at the time of us talking right now.
Yeah, if you're going to get something good for him, then you might as well deal him away. You said it best yourself. The best ability is availability. And this man
Bingo.
is the Ben Simmons of baseball when it comes to the Mets. So Nets, Mets, it's all the same. It all rhymes. But yeah, I'm in with you on that one. And I was a huge Kodai Senga guy when he first got here. But
Me
now
too.
let's break down the tea, because everybody goes on these podcasts now and they rip and they rant and they just talk about everything that goes down in locker rooms or just in sports in general. Adam Ottavino pretty much went scorched earth on the full franchise. But let's first break down what he said about Mendoza, how he said that he's got no feel, poor communication, and that he doesn't protect arms. He also said that they went through 46 different pitchers throughout last season. Are these fair critiques, or is Ottavino saying and doing too much?
I think it's fair to an extent because you have to realize Ottavino is someone who was with the Mets in 2024 to a degree. He understands the Mets more than most current, former, or active players outside the Mets organization. So to hear his input, it was more so out of his own personal frustration as someone who was actually part of the organization, was a part of the clubhouse to a degree, and understands how Mendoza's way of thinking is. He also went on to say in comments from that same live stream that he had on YouTube over the past 24 hours, when replying to fans, that he thinks Mendy is still, by all accounts, a good manager. There's a lot of things that he likes about him, but he did make it known how much he's been frustrated with his fellow relievers that he's seen over the past calendar year all go down with Tommy John-like injuries, as the Mets, as we know, utilize more pitchers than any other team in Major League Baseball history in 2025 between their rotation and bullpen. So it begs the question, who's that most to blame here in that kind of scenario? And I think Mendy kind of took a bit more of the brunt than he otherwise deserved, and here's why. David Stearns is the one who builds this roster, right? He's the Mets president, and he went into the 2025 season with the Mets having a rotation filled with uncertainty with guys that have not had great track records of health, paired with a bullpen that obviously Stearns loves to rotate different kind of MLB caliber pitchers that you call it from the minors, that you pick up off the waiver claim, whatever the case may be, for the sake of eating innings in the short term. And that really came back to bite the Mets heavily. So you have a rotation that doesn't pitch deep for you, and you have a bullpen that's been very fickle in the quality. Color me shocked. You're seeing guys get overworked and seeing guys get hurt at a large rate. But what we have seen since then is even former Mets bench coach John Gibbons, as of today, come out and state that Ottavino's comments really aren't accurate to how he believes Mendoza utilized the bullpen to the best of his abilities. So I see both sides of the coin here. I see the player point of view, a reliever, mind you, who understands the struggle with being a reliever in Major League Baseball, on how you're expected to get your outs no matter really how healthy or not healthy that you are. That's why guys like Reed Garrett for the Mets, for example, has pitched through injury before he was put on the injured list each of the past 2 seasons. Now it really is how the Mets separate themselves from other teams in baseball in that regard. I don't believe that they have. And I'll go as far as to say as this is as not much of a Mets issue or a Carlos Mendoza issue as it is a roster building issue and a league-wide issue. I stated this on X yesterday, and I'll say it again to you, Brandon. You know, in my opinion, my key takeaway from these remarks has more so to do with why we should focus as to how this is a league-wide issue on how the LA Dodgers, the back-to-back reigning champs, have set, in my mind and the minds of many, a terrible example on how to go about pitching orchestration for your bullpen, for your rotation. And what I mean by that is the Dodgers built a team over the past 15 years. That's been great. A continued competitor looking to not only make playoffs, but to win a World Series. But what have the Dodgers done to change their philosophy each of the past couple of years that has led them to now being World Series champions? And that's by deviating away from heavy emphasis on player development and making sure that you do everything in your power to make sure that your pitchers aren't hurt, to now having max effort, max velo pitchers that you spend millions upon millions of dollars on, heavy influence in the trade market for guys that you know can be boom or bust because of their velocity. And in doing so, the Dodgers have built a rotation that's the best in baseball because they can handle all the races going down with injury in the first half of the season because they know that they're going to be healthy by the year's end. And I think there's something to be said when you look at how the Dodgers operate and how they separate themselves from the rest, because they've spent more money, they've done more drastic trades than anyone else, and they've been able to bite the bullet with those continued woes they're pitching. So do the Dodgers care about player health? Clearly not to the same degree as other teams in baseball. Clearly not as much as you could argue as the New York Mets right now. Both have a lot of pitching injuries, but it leads to the point. I think this needs to be talked about lesser in regards to someone like Carlos Mendoza and more from a league-wide issue top down, because it's going to continue to get worse before it gets any better.
Gordy, that was a very passionate rant right there, man. I'm ready to write an email to my senator and just just regurgitate what you said, and you left me at a loss for words just now. Absolutely love it.
I'm glad.
But I want to throw this Ottavino clip on what he said about Brandon Nimmo at Francisco Lindor, just anything and everything. Keep that same energy for when we come out so I can get your thoughts on what he said about Nimmo.
This is a very delicate situation. Let me speak about this for a second. When I saw that Nimmo popped up on the trade rumors, I said, oh boy, that is not going to sit well with Brandon. Brandon's a very proud player. Brandon got pissed when they did like a Yankees-Mets team a couple years ago, and Andy Martino had Verdugo as the left fielder and not Nimmo. Like, I saw Nimmo go at Andy Martino in the hallway about that, and I was like, damn, like, you read the paper like that? Like, you care about what the talking heads say that much? Like, that's surprising to me. Also, I don't think he liked all the talk about Lindor being the captain, just based on one of the articles I read. Now, I don't know any of that inside. Nimmo's a very gentle, nice, great human being, but I think he's a little proud of a player, and so I think he also likes potentially being a Met for life. I think there's a world in which Nimmo could have a couple more great years and get himself way up on the Met leaderboard. You might start to think about his number getting up there in the rafters. That's how long he's been a Met. So to me, it's going to be hard to convince him to go. I think he's going to want to stay unless he feels super disrespected, and then he'd probably go to some place he's comfortable. But this is an eggshell situation. It's an eggshell situation. Stern's not the best at communicating. So I would love to be a fly on a wall for this conversation. That would be so exciting to me. But I don't know what's going to happen.
The floor is yours. How do you feel about him coming out and saying the things that he's saying, especially when he's 1 to 2 years removed away from this team and this roster?
Yeah, so the Nimmo quotes are interesting because everyone knows Brandon Nimmo as being this like golden retriever type personality. Like when you think of a selfless human being, you'll look no further than Brandon Nimmo. He's the same guy that's been driving his like late 2000s, Nissan Altima or whatever it is for the longest time just to stay humble. And I love that. But to hear these remarks, I find interesting because there's two key takeaways. There's one, the reaction with Andy Martino. And Andy did actually state on X as of yesterday that, yes, that interaction did in fact happen, but Brandon is such a good human being that, they had a really good cordial conversation out of it in the end. So I think it's one, Nimmo being a bit more prideful than maybe what us fans from our perspective have known at this point, which is really interesting and good to hear because we only know so much about the players other than what the media or talking heads like myself have the chance to relay when we find information. So for Nimmo to come out and, basically have an issue with Andy Martino, as Andy, like many others in the space, has included Brandon Nimmo in trade talks over the years. You have to wonder if that coincides with the other. I'm sure it does. I also think of, the idea that maybe Brandon Nimmo doesn't love the idea of having Francisco Lindor's name thrown in as captain. So I find it very fascinating. And I think what this tells us is that there's more that meets the eye from just what you see first and foremost from a player's personality. Once you start to kind of understand a little bit more on how they are from the inside, it gives us a greater understanding from a fan point of view. Do I think that there's anything bad that's coming out of these remarks regarding Nimmo? No, I don't, because trust me when I say there's a large contingent of players, not only in baseball, but you can know this obviously from the NFL perspective, of guys that get disgruntled with the media because they're not happy to hear their names either involved in trade talks prematurely, among many other topics that they just don't want to see out there in the public. So my biggest takeaway personally is more so on the leadership aspect of things. If Nimmo at all maybe doesn't love to hear Lindor's name in the light of captain, is that telling him how Nimmo feels as a leader in the Mets organization, that maybe he feels he deserves more credit than what he's got at this point? I'm not entirely sure, but I'm just spitballing for the sake of trying to connect the dots the way that Adam Ottavino has kind of laid out the floor plan for us to go ahead and read. So to hear from his perspective, I thought was key, considering the fact that he, again, was Brandon Nimmo's teammate, understands all these guys on the back of his hand. I'm sure still has very good relationships with plenty on the roster.
All right, the man spilled the tea. Luckily, we were able to have you on so you can break it down for us, Wardy. Appreciate you, man. We got a long off season, so we'll be seeing you again shortly.
Absolutely, Brandon. Thanks so much for having me on.